like to know what I'm following.
You can do your dance later. I'm just checking to make sure it is afternoon. This afternoon for our keynote, we have Travis Smith who's joined us. Travis works at Microsoft and his role at the moment is looking after the team in the education space. Travis has a long history of being in schools and education. Over the many years that I've known him, he's been quite an interesting speaker to listen to, and he keeps up to date. So he's going to give us some information today that will hopefully enlighten us without scaring us, because we've had enough scaring things so far. So now it's a bit of a light-hearted information. So thanks, Travis.
Thank you very much. So, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for having me, and come in, there's heaps of space. One of the interesting things that's happening in education at the moment, and this is right up until the last 3 days, is there's a lot more pressure on us in terms of what we need to achieve with IT and how these sort of systems are going to roll out to schools. I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of things. First thing that happened is after I'd mostly finished my presentation, something called Gonski 2.0 dropped. So, you know, that old chestnut. So I've weaved a bit of that in because I think there's some interesting stuff that's going to come out of that for us in the future in education, and especially in educational technology. And the second thing is I'm going to talk about something called the What's Ahead for the Class of 2030 research that was conducted and commissioned that looked at lots of different parts of what do you think a kid who's in kindergarten currently might need to have moving forward in their future. You've seen this sort of stuff until you're blue in the face, especially at IT conferences where we talk about the different phases that have gone on, but the fourth one there is interesting, the fourth industrial revolution, this idea of merging or blending the physical world with the real world. And that's definitely something that's happening when we think about one of the three big bets here. Microsoft are working on lots of stuff, but if you think about the future of technology from a Microsoft perspective, these are three big things Microsoft are interested in and working on a lot. First one is mixed reality. We're going to talk a little bit about that later on in the context of learning. The second one is artificial intelligence, which we're going to talk mostly about today. And the third one is called quantum computing, which I had someone explain to me and I still didn't understand, which is the idea of a different type of, and there'll be experts in the audience here, I'm sure, a different type of computing process that allows for infinitely more speed and processing power than we're currently aware of. Now that's going to have some really positive, profoundly positive impacts in the human race. You know, the ability to crunch such levels of data that we've never been able to crunch before, in models the size we've never been able to see before, to solve challenges, you know, the likes of cancer or global warming or these sorts of things that are up until now previously very difficult for us to do. So the quantum computing part is pretty exciting, but I'll leave that to other experts to talk about. I'm going to talk about the artificial intelligence part a bit because it's pretty interesting in terms of answering a question like this. And when I talk about artificial intelligence, I'm also talking about something called machine learning, which you will have heard about probably as well. This is a pretty big question. This is a foundational question for us in schools to work out whether or not the investments we're making in technology is truly making an impact or a difference to learners in our schools or in our classrooms. And the question really also needs to be unpacked into, well, what technology makes a difference? When does it make a difference? Where, how, and why does it make a difference? So that we can understand when to apply or not apply technology into a sort of a learning sequence or into a process even at a school. So we saw the other day, what was it, 3 days ago now, this Gonski 2.0 paper drop and several announcements, or not, actually nothing was announced, several comments from politicians about, you know, that, oh yes, this report has landed and there are some things in here that we need to focus on. And sort of three of those things that came out, these were the sort of three main pillars, if you haven't seen it, that they are sort of talking about. And I think there's interesting implications for us in IT and schools around some of these three. So for example, this one here, I'm going to start here because I like to do things in an illogical sequence. Cultivating an adaptive, innovative, and continuously improving education system. Now in terms of one of the challenges for you as IT leaders in schools is this idea of it being adaptive and innovative are always challenges that you've got. And that is, how do we sort of manage, you know, some of our legacy stuff with some of the new stuff, and obviously the rise of cloud technology and the reality of Azure and things like that in schools to transform processes. You know, looking at the old model of how, we image up machines, like when I was a school leader, image up machines and hand them out to kids versus sort of modern deployment techniques. All of this is a constant battle for, for IT to lead in schools, and you guys are living that day in, day out. But there's certainly implications in that. It's not actually an IT document at all, but there's implications in that circle I've drawn for IT, absolutely. The next one is similar in that equipping every student to be a creative, connected and engaged learner. We know the role that technology can play in engaging. Engagement is not enough. They have to be involved in what I call purposeful engagement, or else what kids are doing is the modern equivalent of colouring in their heading for 45 minutes, but apparently it's cooler because it happens on a screen. So we do have to look at engagement, and this is going to be an area where we need to keep them connected, keep them engaged, keep them up to date, but also balance all the things that you guys deal with every day in your contexts of, governance and deployment and how do you manage this and scope creep in projects and all that sort of stuff. The third one's really interesting, and that's probably where I'm going to spend most of my time linking to today out of this Gonski report. It's 150 pages of awesome if you want to have a read of it at some stage. And that is that at the moment the data shows that kids aren't making 1 year of progress every year in terms of their abilities. And so that's a bit frightening. But I'm going to propose that one of the things that we could do about that is we could give teachers more time, or we can enable them to have real-time technology which is going to allow them to make better interventions. So we're going to have a look at some of the ideas or the opportunities here around using technology to do that left-hand circle, which is to improve those outcomes for kids. With reference to that, this study was done recently, and the slides are there, but I'll share these slides out through the organising committee so that you can all have a copy of these slides whenever you want them. And it involved 2,000 students, 2,000 teachers, and also 70 global thought leaders and 150 pieces of research sort of folded in. And the idea was to look at, if we take kindergarten kids now and we sort of think about what they might need in 2030, what are the things that are involved? And McKinsey and company were involved in this as well over time. So thinking about making them, life ready, not simply work ready. And the overarching finding was about the future of learning will be profoundly social, personalised and supported by teachers and technology. Teaching is actually one of the professions which is not going to be disrupted as significantly as people think it will. I think it was Gary Steger who once said any teacher who thinks they could be replaced by technology probably should be. Meaning that if all you're doing is delivering the equivalent of a PowerPoint or the equivalent of a video, then you may as well get rid of them. And that's a small part of what teachers do every day, but there's all of the other stuff. And as a matter of fact, some of the other stuff they do is help kids to develop these kinds of skills. So these soft skills, 21st century skills, I know we don't use that term anymore, it's very uncool. Skills for tomorrow, future skills, whatever we call them. We've been doing this for a long time. We've been talking about these skills for a long time. And have a look at the paragraph on the left there. It talks about the significance of developing and applying social and emotional skills in learning. Because those things, students being good social and emotional learners, are twice as predictive of a kid's academic achievement than their environment they come from or the demographics. And we know, if you look at the John Hattie research deeply, we do know the demographic background of kids does make a significant difference to their learning, and so does their home environment. So we now know that in terms of social and emotional skills in learning, that is something we definitely need to be building in kids because it's a really good predictor of academic performance along with everything else, and these are going to be required in the future. It's interesting we talk about this automation move, the idea that technology is going to replace a lot of stuff. I know studies have been done that say for every job that automation is going to replace, because there are many, there's going to be at least one created that is not a job that couldn't be automated. So there's a different type of job that might be available. There's not necessarily less jobs that are going to be available as a result of this. And students really wanted to have sort of personalised instruction. Those who have personalised instructions perform 98%, or are in the top 98% of total students who are taught. They're better than 98% of those taught traditionally. So the personalisation part is the interesting part where I think technology might be able to play a part. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a second. The role of the teacher is amplified. Up to 51% of teachers surveyed said they have strong individual relationships with their students, but as few as 34% of kids said that. So that's pretty interesting. And I can tell you right now that if the move towards answering the Gonski claim is to heap more stuff on kids, to heap more stuff on teachers, expect that 34 to be 12. Because a lot of what you don't have time to do because of the other stuff is to actually build relationships. Spend more time with the kids, just doing stuff with them, building solid relationships. The kids who come into your classroom in the morning and you know damn well they haven't had breakfast. And you know that, as I found out by a kid who told me to F off and jumped out the window in my first year of teaching, you know that his brother was beating him up when I said to him, how about you do your homework? And he was getting beaten up by one of his brothers, of which he had 3, who were living in a caravan together. So we have to be in tune with the kids. We have to have that social, emotional time. The challenge is, time is the problem. I reckon we might be able to use technology to help with that bit. And there are certainly some opportunities here. You know, teachers using technology in the right ways can get up to 30% of their time back to do some of this stuff, to work on this emotional stuff. Let me be a little bit controversial for a minute. There's lots of different changes and shifts that are happening in education. The one I want to focus on here, though, is actually the right-hand side, because it talks to the McKinsey research. It also talks to the Gonski report that's just landed. We need to shift from this idea of one-size-fits-all learning to sort of personalised learning. And we've been hearing about this stuff for a long time. And this is the controversial bit. As a secondary school teacher, I used to teach up to 120 kids per day. I call bullshit on full personalised learning. I don't think you can do it. I don't think you can truly customise 120 kids' worth of curriculum each day or even each week. I think it's too hard. Because that implies that what you've got to do is get feedback about how they're going and have assessed that, marked that. That happens between the hours of 9:30 and 11 at night. And then you've got to have made some interventions based on that, but do it for every individual kid. It's a challenge without the advent of technology. So I think there are some real opportunities for us here to think about how technology might be able to impact this. And one of the greatest resources we've got in our schools is data. So this is where we start thinking about the role of sort of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and these kinds of tools to give us the ability to make better interventions with kids based on the data stuff, based on the stuff that exists in our schools that is there, but we don't have pulled together or we don't all have access to. So a little bit about analytics. I'm going to start with these two. Descriptive analytics down the bottom left is a dashboard of what happened. This is a graph that shows my kids' progress. Here's the bar chart of how the kids are going. And then we've got diagnostic analytics, which is why did that happen? And then as you move through here, you actually get more advanced, like predictive analytics, or what will happen. Based on all of this data set we've had for 10 years, what do we think will happen to these kids on an individual basis? Because we've seen kids like that before. We've had the data in our school for 15 years. It's just never been put in a system before. So it can tell me, hopefully, the right-hand side, what should I do? Because that's the bit I can't do at night when I'm trying to personalise learning for kids. That's the bit that maybe analytics can help with. And so we look at this idea as advanced analytics. Now, if that's a bit confusing for you, these examples under here might sort of make sense. Descriptive is sort of a summary of test results. Diagnostic is, well, what caused those grades? Predictive is who is at risk of performing that way. And the last one is, what should I do about it? How should we teach every individual kid differently to achieve certain results? And the data is there. If you think about the strength of data, the amount of data that you would have in your school is unbelievable in terms of historic data, where you could sort of match a kid who's currently in Year 9 with a kid with the same data who was in Year 9 5 years ago. And if you had a big enough data set, you could actually start to find patterns that emerge across those kids and sort of work out where did those kids go? What were the interventions that made a difference? And what should we be focused on? So there are some really interesting opportunities. So let me give you an example about some data stuff. Who's bigger? Well, it depends which way you look at it. You know, are we talking about height? We're talking about weight? We're talking about shoulder girth? Are we talking about reach? What are we talking about? Or we might look at, you know, who's smarter? Well, in actual fact, these two people have both got an IQ of 107, which is 7 points above average for their age, but there's differences in terms of their individual abilities. So it's not as easy to summarise things straight down to one number, like an intelligence quotient or IQ does. So let's talk about school. Which of these two kids is at greater risk? Well, there's lots of different factors into what greater risk might be. And there are serious business implications as to why you should care in a school. But let's have a look at this. You know, there's resilience, student A, student B, and there's socialisation, optimism, sentiment, you know, blah, blah, blah. All this stuff is going to make a difference to the way they perform, especially when you look at the McKinsey research, which talked about the idea of social and emotional skills and the development of that. Wouldn't it be good if we could find a way to measure that so that we could find which kids needed some more support in that area and build that? And obviously, we're trying to build it with every kid. So, in order to think about this, I'm going to talk about some data analytics and AI that has been done not in education, but in looking at the population of snow leopards. So this is some work that was being done in America, and the research team were in America, but there's a real problem with snow leopard populations. And they were looking at how they could use machine learning and artificial intelligence to help solve the problem. And so here's the researchers setting up their hidden cameras out there. It's like a David Attenborough film. And they're out there setting up their cameras and they're looking for photographs of snow leopards, so they're going to hopefully identify them and all that sort of stuff. It was a pretty laboursome job. And not only the laboursome part wasn't going out and setting up the cameras, it was analysing the photographs that they got back from these automatically triggered cameras when anything walked in front of these cameras or when a leaf blew across. And so there's ways now that we can start to have a look at photographs. Pretty cool photo, huh? Automatically taken, snow leopard walked up, was obviously a bit intrigued as to what was going on. Some photos look like this, like a selfie. Very intrigued to what's going on. Some look like this, not so intrigued, I'm leaving. Some photos look like this. And you'll have those in your data. You know, you'll have some sort of something in there that's an anomaly that doesn't kind of make sense in the rest of the data. That's okay. Sometimes no snow leopards are around. Sometimes the data's a bit foggy. So you need to sort of be able to see through this stuff. Can anyone see a snow leopard here? Machine learning found it. It's there. What about this one? Oh yeah, there it is. What about in this one? Bottom right, yep. Some people found the tail. So the idea is that these are here, behind you, in the middle of there, which is maybe doing something inappropriate, I'm not sure, might be licking. What about this one? It's like a lesson in camouflage right in the middle, looking at you. It's about to have you for lunch, just there. The interesting thing about this is that what they were able to do was train a model which could, with greater accuracy, find from all of the photographs, the hundreds of thousands of photographs that were triggered by these cameras, find incidences of snow leopards versus anything else. Once upon a time, quite a cumbersome and laboursome job. As a matter of fact, has anyone heard of the Westpac chopper thing? What's that drone thing they've got called? Little Ripper, it's called. And flies out over the beach now and can drop a flotation device for people who are, you know, out the back of a rip or something. And they've also got they're starting to use those for finding sharks in the water. The interesting thing is that one of those, the artificial intelligence that is behind the system that is processing those videos can actually identify a shark versus any other sea creature with an accuracy of about 90%, 85, 90%. Because sharks and dolphins from a helicopter probably look pretty similar. And I'd be pushing the freak out button every time. Blow the siren. Humans can do about 16% accuracy. So we're suddenly at a point in time where the artificial intelligence is able to sort of make visual interpretations, which is what this is about, with pretty amazing accuracy. But there are a lot of data. There's a lot of data here. And every time you take more photographs, you get more data and more data. And that's where the idea of artificial intelligence, or maybe we should be calling it augmented intelligence because it's augmenting ours, is important. let's go back to this idea. The problem is, we don't just have one kid. If I'm a teacher, I have that many kids. And by the way, this is just whether or not they're at risk based on those social emotional factors, nothing to do with learning data. And the amount of data that is in schools is really impactful if you can pull it together. Let me give you a little probably unrealistic example. Let's say I'm the coach of the ping pong team. That's the unrealistic bit. No, it's not. Let's say I'm the coach of the ping pong team. And little Johnny decides to not turn up to my ping pong team anymore. And I go, oh, boy, I've got to find a new little Johnny to fill the ping pong team. It's a crisis. So off I go and I find a new little Johnny to fill the ping pong team. But you know what? If I had data that was also showing that Johnny's grades were sliding, his truancy was going up, and his behavioural incidence was getting worse, then maybe the disconnecting from the ping pong team is more significant than me just going, I've got to find a new little Johnny. As a matter of fact, one of the things that happens when kids go into depression, which we know where that can end up, is that they will disconnect themselves from school activities like the ping pong team, like the school production, like the sporting teams. You've got all that data in your school. The question is whether or not it is being surfaced in some way that someone, probably not you guys, can make some kind of intelligent decision about whether or not it's relevant, whether there is some way to pull that together. Because when I start looking at a cohort of kids, it becomes a bigger problem. And the systems and the intelligence can now start crunching massive amounts of data. If I'm a school principal, I want to know data, generally speaking, across all of that and different cohorts. And the trick is to find patterns, because it's the patterns that emerge that are the really interesting parts of all the data you have in your school. And it's about sort of finding where they are, and these seemingly irrelevant connections between data, or no connections, are actually truly connected. Why on earth should we care about that? So the AI and the machine learning is now at a point where it can do pretty smart stuff and start pulling this together. Here's some reasons why we should care. Here's some interesting things that we could discover if we had our data. I'm going to start here. If a kid at year 8 pays $20,000 a year to go to a school, drops out in year 8, start of year 8, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 grand your school's lost. At university, work is happening around student retention. They are looking at ways that they can make sure that they can retain students. Now, if you're going to do that, then you need to make sure that you have got some sort of predictive indicators of what makes students leave a place. What are the triggers that I might pick up in my school that might flag that kid as a risk of leaving? I mean, a risk of leaving is a little less of a problem than a risk of severe depression. But it is still a business challenge that we have. And if you're going to look at that, then you probably need to look at this, because you're going to need to get some more students. But the one that we talk about with the Gonski report and stuff is actually more about this, more about this, and more about this. So forget about those ones over there. And so there are profound opportunities for us to work better with our data and make more meaningful interventions around those things. And I think that's what some of the recommendations in the Gonski report are talking about. There are serious opportunities for us to answer these questions and many more when we think about our use of, for example, data. Here's some other questions. You know, when and where's bullying like to occur? I used to be a deputy principal of school, and the second one is actually a question we asked. Is the Reading Recovery Program worth the money we invest in it? And so we sat around the principal's office and we went, oh, it seems to be going well. You know, Mary's nice, who runs it. Oh, I spoke to Jess in the car park the other day. She seems to be going well. One of the students. And so we make these big decisions that cost 70 grand a year on the basis of not considering all the data we've got in our school, because it's not been pulled together. And so there's big opportunities for us in this regard. If you're using Office 365 at the moment, you've probably got Power BI. I'll do a demo on this at lunchtime at the Microsoft stand, but this is Queensland education data. And the Queensland education data is freely available from EQ, freely available, but it's in 14 places, so you can never find it. And none of it's been correlated. So Ray Fleming, who some of you will have heard of from Microsoft, pulled it together in a day. 12 hours it took him, and he's not a data scientist. And he sat down and he pulled this data together, and he was able to then find out information about the Queensland education students and start to draw some pretty interesting parallels between this data. That is freely available in Office 365 if you use it. And it's a powerful way to start. The interesting thing about this is that it partially speaks to the idea of cleansing data, of organising data in a good way. Because what you're going to have is pretty significant amounts of data in your school which might look more like that. And what you need to find is those. And that's quite a challenge. And as the pressure keeps heaping on us out of Gonski and so forth, we need to make sure that our data is in some way organised so that we can start to leverage whatever tools come, or whatever we need to create. Here's one of the challenges. One of the challenges for us in schools is that we keep adding this, that, and the other thing on. And then you've got your data in 15 different places, or 20 different places, or 40 different places, and then you're going to try and leverage that data, and it's pretty difficult sometimes, because the data resides in that company, not on site. It's not your data anymore, not even in your environment. It's somewhere else. For example, athletics data, right, which sits in the cloud somewhere else for athletics. They're pretty important data if you're really looking at some of these factors. And there are probably 15 other examples of it. So we do need to think about sort of complexity of our data sets in schools. Okay, let me shift tact slightly. I'm going to talk a bit about skills in kids because, and this is selfish, Microsoft have a problem. We can't employ enough people in this space. We want to employ your kids who come out of your schools. We've got a real problem. There is a massive amount of opportunity in sort of the STEM-based area, and we've got a bit of a challenge. And there's some interesting data here. You know, 3% of Year 6 kids are frequently using IT for any technical tasks. Really? We need to start giving kids crunchy problems where they can't just open up some single app or application and solve it. We need to give them crunchy problems where they have to do multiple things. 65% bottom left of teachers said that lack of PD in STEM area is a big challenge for them. Here's the challenge for us in the top right, which is basically that 100,000 jobs are going to exist by 2020 in this kind of STEM-based area. Currently, we're tracking for 30,000 graduates. We've got a problem. We've got a 70,000 person gap. But in schools, we need to sort of understand that STEM is more about cognitive skills and disposition than it is about buying widgets and shoving them in a room. And it's actually about some of those other skills, the problem-solving skills, the analytical skills, you know, the resilient skills of failing forward and trying again and us encouraging it in education. And there are lots of ways that you guys do this all day, every day, because no one are better problem solvers than IT people. I'm telling you right now, it's amazing. So we need to sort of making sure that we sort of focus less on widgets and gadgets and focus more on what are the skills and dispositions that these things can create. AR, VR, MR, is that BS? Have we decided yet? There seems to be a fair bit of research out there that looks at it. There seems to be some positive things going on. You know, and the HoloLens down there is an example of it. And you can see down here, hopefully, I'm not sure whether you'll be able to see, but the idea of students here learning medicine. And these students are learning medicine, they've got a HoloLens on, but they're actually walking around a body, and they can all see each other, but they can also see the body, so they're not sort of stuck a phone on their face and going, well, that's my experience. They can actually interact with the other people there, and they can learn together, and they can whatever. So that's actually out of Case Western University in the US. I just want to talk a little bit about some of the other possibilities, one of which is local here in Canberra, which you're probably familiar with. And we'll come back.
I was tired of preparing kids for yesterday. We were always preparing kids for this world that didn't really exist anymore and that wasn't going to exist when they graduated. And I wanted to get my kids to the point where they could actually build the future.
We've seen a fundamental shift already in how a lot of educational resources are being delivered. We've seen a shift from print books through to ebooks. And I think the next evolution of that is from books to mixed reality.
As I started preparing my lectures and thinking how I'm going to communicate this to the students, one thing I wished is I had a 3D chalkboard.
Stopped it there deliberately. One of the things I wished as a physics professor is that I could have a 3D chalkboard. Cool. That's cool. It's more than cool. It probably helps people understand concepts better. And so that's the opportunity, right? Is that he's got all those people sitting around. Now, of course, the HoloLens is expensive, and it's a sort of prototype technology that's at the forefront of that technology. And you know, it's been licensed out so other companies can start using the chips out of it, so they can start building them at lower cost and all that stuff, right? But the interesting thing is about the application of this, and that is, wouldn't it be cool if we could have a 3D chalkboard? Yeah, there are some things that are pretty crap to learn in 2D. Anatomy is one of them. Case Western University, which is where that guy's from, but he's a physics professor. They have the medical team, one of the professors of medicine there, was saying, you've got no idea how the organs sit differently in a body when it's actually laying down than when it's standing up. And we always teach it as though the organs are all nicely organised and hanging down like they would be in me right now. But in actual fact, when someone's getting surgery, they're not. And so how do we do that? How do we teach that? How does your 2D textbook show you that? And so these are some interesting ways that they're starting to use this technology in learning. We've got to understand, though, that kids won't get a job from having experienced AR, VR, or mixed reality. That's not enough. To walk around and go, oh, that's cool, look, there's the volcano or whatever, is good for their learning, but it is not going to get them a job. Everyone's going to be able to do it. Everyone will have done it. Here's an example, which is also based from Adelaide. They had a massive upheaval in their industry, in their car industry, as many parts of Australia have had. Matter of fact, we basically don't have one anymore in terms of manufacturing. But one of the things they were doing is looking at retraining and reskilling. So this is Saab at the bottom left, which traditionally we think as what kind of company? What do they make? Aircraft, good. What else? Cars, what else? Military systems. One of their biggest parts of their business is military systems. And so what happened was that they started reskilling some people who were coming out of the manufacturing areas and, you know, the engineers and all that sort of stuff who were left over as a result of manufacturing leaving Australia and leaving Adelaide. And they're now developing some of those systems you can see on the left-hand side, which are military systems, which in 5 or 10 years won't look like a HoloLens. They'll look like a chip on the side of something, or maybe a contact lens, which will give soldiers in the field a whole different range of information they've currently got now. And that might tell them who's over what hill, what direction, how far, how many soldiers. They're flying these drones over now, which have got all that information, right? But it will be beamed straight down to the people in the field so that they can make you know, interesting decisions about what they want to do in that field. So it's not all about sort of the top end of town. This is Minecraft Education Edition, which you can start coding in. Education Edition's sort of been out there. As a matter of fact, there are, you know, every government school in Victoria has been licensed to use it, rolling it out at the moment, 30,000 licenses in New South Wales. You know, the idea of Minecraft, but because Minecraft, I never talk about Minecraft as a game. Because when kids use it in this context, it's not a game. It's like what I used to do with Lego. It's like modern Lego. That's what they're doing. They're building stuff. And so it's an open platform for creativity and expression of understanding. You know, two groups of Year 7 kids, both of them have learned the theory of how to make sustainable housing. Build me a really bad house that is not sustainable, doesn't use any environmental and sustainability theory, and right next door, these kids are going to build the most sustainably relevant house you've seen in anywhere. And they're going to do that side by side, so you can walk around and have a look. You know, this sort of stuff's happening. But coding is a starting point. Some of the other technology that you've got is really about democratizing 3D. And so Microsoft have, you know, committed to allowing sort of 3D creation to occur just in the operating system. 3D Paint, start basic, allow kids to build in 3D, allow them to print it out on their 3D printer, whatever they've made, allow them to use mixed reality viewer there, like the helicopter that's floating over the desk in the Brisbane Microsoft office the other night. Allow them to do that, allow them to sort of point at it. Why can't they act beside 3D characters they build? There's no reason. You can now have animated characters sitting there. You could put them like they're standing on the table there. You could have them look like they're sitting in a seat and have a student actually be a newsreader filming alongside a character that is 3D that they made. Why can't you do that? Well, you can. And so it's really interesting to think about the way that technology is kind of being democratized for kids. That's pretty junior-y stuff, right? Leads on to more advanced things. Let me show you this example of it. This is the video that's going to last for about 4 seconds. Have a listen to these girls who started to use machine learning at their school.
Well, we just built a system to predict breast cancer.
Sorry, you did what? This was a project that we thought was going to happen with Year 11 kids, where they were using machine learning models within Azure to start looking at data systems as part of their IT studies. We pretty quickly realised that Year 8 girls could handle it. And there's some reasons why Year 8 girls could handle it, but what they did was they started to get these data sets, pull them together, put them into machine learning, and then build models around it and try again, extrapolate the data and let it sort of work out whether or not certain people are at more increased disposition to breast cancer than others. And they just sit there and go, yeah, so we just made a model to predict breast cancer. Year 8 kids. And so democratizing that access to IT for kids is really important. Here's the problem with a lot of IT. That's what machine learning used to look like. And it might make you feel, you know, a bit like this, or a bit like this, or eventually this. And now it looks more like this. And it's not just whiter, but it's actually about the fact that you can drag and drop complex sequences of stuff in orders and link ideas together in some sort of visual way. No longer is it the realm of coder to be able to do data visualization and modeling and machine learning. And so a lot of work's been happening to sort of make it more accessible for people. So there's pretty cool stuff that can happen as a result of this kind of technology being out in the wild. So let me show you another little example, about 30 seconds worth.
I'm Saqib Sheikh. I lost my sight when I was 7, and shortly after that I went to a school for the blind, and that's where I was introduced to talking computers, and that really opened up a whole new world of opportunities. I joined Microsoft 10 years ago as a software engineer. I love making things which improve people's lives. And one of the things I've always dreamt of since I was at university was this idea of something that could tell you at any moment what's going on around you.
I think it's a man jumping in the air doing a trick on a skateboard.
Pretty cool. Now, the idea of that is that he sort of saw a problem, obviously, for himself, and decided that he would try and work out how to solve this problem. And put into these glasses this idea that it would predict, or it would view what it was seeing, and it would tell him in his ear what had just been seen. Not very impactful for me, massively impactful for people with vision impairment. And so he's an engineer, worked at Microsoft. The interesting thing about it is that it's just using some of these things called emotion APIs. And so sitting within Azure, your kids can use these for free. As a matter of fact, we've done some workshops with kids where they've started looking at the intelligent kiosk, which has got all of these in it, and started ideating what on earth they could build if they had access to it. Because making something that is an emotion, that can predict emotion based on a piece of video or an image, is probably something that takes a lot of coding. But if you just package that up and say, oh, by the way, here it is, just have that, then you're at a level where you can start implementing some of these emotional APIs together and start to think about how we might be able to use them. So this intelligence kiosk, I mean, it's got lots of them in there. So we said to some kids, what could you create if you had these? If you had access to some of these things, and we explained what they did, kids were coming up with amazing ideas. You know, stuff about, oh, what if we had some sort of app that allowed a teacher to see based on facial expression whether kids were bored or not? I'm like, okay, that'd be cool. So they came up with all of these random ideas, and the idea of getting kids using real-world tools is so important. We need to start thinking about how beyond, say, year 8, I don't know when the sweet spot is in your school, but we need to start getting them onto real-world tools which may get them a job if that's what they end up doing. And so this is available to kids to start playing with. As a matter of fact, the next little video we did was with some schools in Victoria, the next little video I'll show you, where they were working on creating chatbots for the new tech schools that are being built in Victoria. So, I think it goes for 20 seconds.
The Chatbotathon is this great event where it brings people from all different schools together and even industry experts like Microsoft so that they can really learn about a really exciting field and part of technology that's obviously going to be a part of the future.
Humans use chatbots to access the cloud and big data. Chatbots can sift through that data faster than humans can, and they help us find the answers that we want.
I can just see this becoming our future. So I'm interested in learning about it and being able to apply it.
So the interesting thing was in the workshop is the amount of thinking those kids had to do to build that chatbot was unbelievable. Because a chatbot is that little thing pops up on a website that says, "Can I help you?" And it's like, "Oh yes, I'm Steve, the chatbot," and you type in questions or whatever. And that's available for kids to start, using to build their own. This was a unique problem where in Victoria they're building these tech schools, and they're sort of STEM kind of schools linked to industry. And so what they wanted to do was get this group of kids together and build chatbots which would answer the kinds of questions that they were constantly getting asked about the 10 schools. What's the curriculum like? How can my daughter or son get involved? Maybe it's one of the interesting things the kids found out is that they have to think through the eyes of the different audiences who would be asking questions. Parents are going to ask very different questions than teachers at schools. Then the principals at the feeder schools who can use those tech schools will be asking completely different questions. And the kids had to think about what all the questions would be and what might the answers be and code that in so that the chatbot could make reasonable responses. And then they had to think about what's the personality of the chatbot. Because you don't always want just harsh expression, yeah, you're just going to do this. You need to actually have some sort of way of expressing that with some personality. And so the kids did amazing work in about a day to build those chatbots. I mean, I would have loved a chatbot in our website back at school that allow parents to just find out stuff like, when's the parent-teacher interview? Or, is my son in 8F going to the excursion on Thursday? Because, little Johnny has got the screwed up paper in the bottom of his bag, or, the notification hasn't got home, or, there's lots of different reasons. When we start getting more serious, more senior, I think that if there are kids in year 11 and 12 in IT at the moment, and maybe other areas too, like mathematics, there are opportunities for them to start taking some pretty serious certifications for basically free via edX. Basically free meaning if they want to get the actual certification, it's like $100 to get it once you complete the course. But, this is a series of stuff, not everything you'll find in edX, of course, because there's a huge range of stuff, that is talking about the kinds of technology that I've been referring to. Artificial intelligence, data science, top left. I know that not a lot of mathematics teachers get enough headspace to think about data science, but when any kid says, where am I ever going to use this in the future, everything that we have from now on that is anything software related will have data scientists behind it. It is just huge amounts of data science going on and huge amount of work in AI and in DevOps and in lots of other areas. And so they're available for you or for other people. Okay, let me just bring this good ship home with some examples. There are ways that we can use current technologies to make positive differences right now in schools, which are going to lead to the improvement in the Gonski stuff. One of the challenges is it doesn't happen at scale, and it also takes time often to get these things up and running. Here's an example, some prototype screenshots from probably about 12 months ago. I'm sure this looks very different now. This is a screenshot of what Catholic Education WA were creating, which is built on a platform of lots and lots of considered use of data. So they built a whole platform where, from the ground up, where every bit of data that is collectible across schools, across student performance, across emotional, across assessment, is all able to talk to each other and is able to be fed up into some smart systems which are going to use AI to present information. So that's like a teacher one. So the interesting things here is that it knows what it knows what the recent documents are that a teacher has been working on, because they're sort of surfacing there. And if there is something, it would also know whether or not that teacher has performed really well in teaching that concept last year. It's probably got that data. So wouldn't it be good for me as a teacher if I come to the unit on whatever it is I'm going to teach, and the system could say to me, hey, by the way, here's some opportunities for professional learning around that approach. Because it actually knows what it is that is going to make better performance in that space, and it tells me, down here they use a sort of integrated tool called ClanEd, to pull up intelligent suggestions for teachers about the kinds of resources that may actually be useful for them, or maybe it's things that other teachers have made over time. And then we think about students, and on theirs they're talking about sentiment data. Sentiment data is really interesting. They thought after a while, oh, maybe we shouldn't include sentiment data, and they asked some of the kids, and the kids said, I'd like you to know how I feel. Might explain some of my behaviour sometimes. I'd like you to know how I feel. If you've got 10,000 students across a system who do that 6 times a day and tell you how they're feeling, there might be some pretty interesting data you could get within a month. When you've also got assessment data in the same system which knows about the time at which they said they were feeling certain ways. Or maybe you look at the kids who have dropped out of social activities at school and how they're sort of tracking over time. You know, there's ways that these systems can be smart if they're built on a platform which acknowledges the use of data. In reference to the Gonski stuff, there's an opportunity for the bottom left there. Not just what should I teach today, but how should I teach it today? If it's got that prescriptive analytics built into it, maybe it knows better than I do which one of my 120 kids needs a certain type of technique that I wouldn't have picked up on. So not only the what, but the how. We'll come back to that a little bit later. Let's talk about another example of positive things that are happening at the moment. This is a tertiary educator. This is Dr. Sylvia Urban, who's now Associate Professor at RMIT. And she transformed the way that she taught lectures, which previously were, you know, PowerPoint straight up, students sitting and her sort of doing that. All she did really was she converted her stuff into OneNote notebooks. She got herself a Surface with a wireless sort of cable so she could wander around. She put that OneNote notebook in the cloud, which was synchronizing to all the students' tables, regardless of whether they had Mac, PC, iPad, Android, phone, whatever. And she basically taught with a stylus, and she started to teach chemistry that way. Now, to be honest, if I'm paying to go to RMIT and I'm paying to go to Dr. Sylvia Urban, who's a very well-renowned and well-published chemist, I want to see her think like a chemist. I don't want to see her present PowerPoint. I want to see her think like a chemist. And the thinking in chemistry is about the stuff on the right. It's actually about the symbolic language of chemistry. And so regardless of device, regardless of student device, what she was able to do was improve the pass grade of students where she used this technique over 2 years by between 5 and 12%, and got the highest result she'd ever got in 10 years of teaching the same subjects in what's called overall satisfaction and general teaching score, which is the way that students assess lecturers about their performance, just by changing the way that she was teaching. And she's published it into journal articles which have gone around the world. We also know that in terms of student devices, there are schools that have made decisions to go around sort of stylus-enabled devices and are thinking differently about the impact that that can make. So let's talk about note-taking, right, which is what this research pertains to. There are kids sitting in classrooms every day. Right now, if you're going to any university, 95% of them will be sitting behind a keyboard-based device, taking the crappiest notes you've ever seen. As a matter of fact, what they're doing is blindly, mindlessly transcribing what is being said. What is being said, full stop, next sentence. The science proves it over and over again. You go into more and more places and there's more and more people thinking that the keyboard is the future of how we should take notes. See that whiteboard over there? That's how we should be taking notes. Yeah, and someone is. There's also research to show that taking notes in diagrammatic form, I can guarantee you that if that lady by the name of Jess, if Jess was quizzed on the content of this presentation and you were quizzed on it, who do you reckon is going to do better? Why on earth aren't we telling our kids this? Does anyone know? Is it because it's uncool? I don't know. What Jess has to do there is think about what is coming next out of my mouth and contextualize it in the form of her diagram. She doesn't want to stuff up her diagram, right? So every time I say something new, she's like, is this part of the other stuff? I've never met Jess before. She hasn't heard my stuff. She's trying to work out, does this fit in with the other point? Is this this extension of that? Or is he on a brand new tangent where I need a new arrow that sort of synthesizes this? That is great thinking. I tell you what, you're not doing that to the keyboard. And so we see this time and time again in schools. We keep giving kids EPUBs. We keep giving them textbooks online. This research was done on paper. Everyone gets these 2 bits of paper. Half of the room here, by the way, when you solve this science problem using those two bits of paper you've got, you're not allowed to write on it while you think about it. And you guys are. Who do you think performs better? The ones who can annotate it, mark it up, diagram on it, and write on it perform 24.5% better than the ones who can't. Yet we sit kids in schools behind a keyboard and we give them electronic stuff to try and think about. There are ways that we can start making positive differences in this right now. If we talk about feedback, this is from Brunswick Secondary College. And they use OneNote notebooks, which I'm sure many schools in the audience do. And so on the left-hand side there is an essay. This is Year 12 English. And that essay is obviously just, the kids are typing it away and it's synchronizing to their teacher and all that stuff. The teacher comes in and gives some feedback, but that feedback is based on ink, there's some typing there, and there's also an audio recording. And so that's better feedback. Read the Gonski report, you'll hear about what they talk about with feedback. But then they take it one step further. Down the bottom there, which you can't see, the coloured squares, is a rubric, an assessment rubric. And what they do at Brunswick Secondary College is that they actually highlight where the kids are in each of these sort of realms here. But then if the kid goes to the one that's just below where I put the square, the worst square you've ever seen, if they click on that, it's a hyperlink. And it takes them to another page. And that page has a worked example of what the next level up looks like. So instead of me as a student getting feedback that says, here's where you are, I can also click on the rubric, which is hyperlinked to another page I've got, that says, and here's what you're aspiring to, and this is what it looks like and sounds like and smells like. So now in my mind, I know what I'm aspiring to, not just the next level, which suddenly I have to interpret out of a rubric. Pretty interesting feedback. Now, I'm going to wrap this up by talking about the ways that technology can make positive difference with an example about kids reading.
The true purpose of education is to create possibility.
It was a little hard for me. People laugh whenever I read sometimes.
Well, they knew how to read, and I didn't.
I will never be good at reading. I will probably be held back again.
It highlights the words to know where I am.
When it's reading, I see spaces between the words, and it's easy to focus on.
The first time I actually could read that book, I was proud of myself.
I was very proud of myself. Good job, Joey.
Woo, woo.
When technology and education come together, possibility becomes reality.
I want to read every book in here.
Microsoft just showed us the slick marketing video. Here's what it looks like, learning tools. It's available now in OneNote, OneNote Online, OneNote iPad, Word, Outlook, everywhere. Browser, non-browser, Mac, PC, doesn't matter. And the reason it's everywhere is because it was actually designed by a dude who had a nephew who had dyslexia. The dude worked at Microsoft. And they have these hackathons in this amazing place called the Garage at Microsoft head office, where they come in and just do passion projects. And this guy developed this, it's been out for a couple of years now, where any time you want to view something in the left-hand format or the right's a Word document, you can actually get it to remove half the stuff, which takes care of kids who've got visual crowding problems. I had that, didn't know what it was called back then, but I don't read for pleasure even now. It's too hard for me. But the idea of being able to break stuff up, put a black background with white writing is much more profoundly better for kids with dyslexia than white with black. But that might not be the challenge. So you can change it to blue if there's kids with certain visual impairments. It doesn't matter. The idea of this is about sort of democratizing access to reading for kids. There are kids that we speak to all the time who missed out on the conversation about Harry Potter because they couldn't read it. They couldn't read it. They didn't know where to access it. You can take a photograph of this thing, put it into a OneNote page or a Word doc, and then get learning tools to read it. What's the research say? Here you go. There's a whole paper that's been written about the implications of it for kids and their reading. The blue line, the orange line is the historical sort of data about how kids were progressing, and the blue line you can see there is once they were using reading tools, we see a significant improvement, more rapid improvement in terms of their ability to read. There are lots and lots and lots of examples of the ways that technology can really help us and help kids to achieve the stuff that is in Gonski. Whether it's looking at better AI, machine learning, and data modelling using something you've got at the moment if you're in Office 365 land called Power BI. By the way, that's what this report is about on your table. If you've got one of those on your table, otherwise let us know and we'll get you one. It's a Harvard Business Review looking at education 20 years out and thinking about how data might play a role in that. Or whether it's the individual strategies that we should be sharing with teachers. The idea that Jess is learning that better than I would if I sat behind a keyboard. Why aren't we telling kids that? Why aren't we teaching them to do that? There is big, ambitious things we could do with technology as my final piece. We have to be more ambitious with technology. There are some really, really positive things going on, but if we're going to meet the Gonski stuff, then we need to start thinking more ambitiously about how we do it. So rather than have the textbook on the right, imagine that you had some sort of textbook, some sort of, textbook's an old paradigm, I get it, but some sort of digital textbook that was actually aware of every kid's progress. And it also understood the idea the educational research speak of the zone of proximal development, which is that bit beyond what kids know that pushes them to the next level of what they should know. You go too far, they drop, they switch off. If you don't go fast enough, they get bored. The zone of proximal development. There is absolutely no reason why with the data you've got in your schools that eventually we might be able to have technology that doesn't present the page in the same way for every kid, that shows visual learners a very different view based on where they were before, what kind of learning style they have, and where they need to be in their zone of proximal development, versus me, who might be more auditory or maybe something else. There's no limit to what is possible when we start to engage with this kind of future technology. So, hopefully there was something in there of value, and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Travis. That was enlightening as normal with you. So the ideas and things that I saw that come out of that, even the academy things that are available to us, I, like Travis, used to have coloured glasses when I became 25. Never knew I couldn't read or that words didn't sit on a page. So seeing that technology today is just amazing that that can be available for students to be able to have that and that it's openly available. So I'd encourage you to make sure that you let your learning support people know about that technology so they can utilise that. Today, it's lunchtime. Straight after lunch, we have our workshops at 2:20. Then following the workshops, we will be back in here for the final remarks and the illustrious draws that I'm sure none of you have entered. At least I hope so. Anthony England, wherever you are. He cleaned up last year. And the other things that John has asked me to mention too is that anybody that's been involved in running a workshop or a keynote, if you would like to have your content uploaded to the app, you just need to give that to John and he'll put it into the app for you, so it's available there. Ajoy's files have all been uploaded there now, so they're all available. People who are going to the airport on the bus that's arranged here, it will leave from the Crown Plaza at 4 p.m. And anybody that is a teacher that hasn't put in their scanning for today to get their NESA hours up, please drop past and do that. And of course, can you please visit the sponsors? They would love to see you just before we all depart. And the only last thing is for the people who've been staying at the Novotel, if you wish to get your parking validated, you can see John and he'll give you a slip for that. Okay, thank you, and we'll see you later on.